And then Gandhi came. Words and deeds. Literature enriches, refines, and widens our aesthetic perceptions. It also creates an awareness about the evils of society. Further, it changes society beyond our powers of calculation with its humanizing influence. Literature also helps foster generosity and morality in us. Death is inevitable end of life, and our life must be well spent. It is our actions and good deeds which give meaning to life. Hence, our words and deeds should be in tune with each other. A symbiotic relationship between words and deeds is essential. Deeds must be an execution of words. Mahatma Gandhi, the father of our nation, was true to his words in his deeds. Keep your thoughts positive because your thoughts become your words. Keep your words positive because your words become your behavior. So said Mahatma Gandhi. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi is widely recognized as one of the 20th century's greatest political and spiritual leaders. Honored in India as a father of the nation, he pioneered and practiced the principle of satyagraha, resistance to tyranny through mass non-violent civil disobedience, while leading nationwide campaigns to ease poverty, expand women's rights, build religious and ethnic harmony, and eliminate the injustices of the caste system. Gandhi supremely applied the principles of nonviolent civil disobedience, playing a key role in freeing India from foreign domination. He was often imprisoned for his actions, sometimes for years, but he accomplished his aim in 1947 when India gained its independence from Britain. Due to his stature, he is now referred to as Mahatma, meaning great soul. World civil rights leaders from Martin Luther King Jr. to Nelson Mandela have credited Gandhi as a source of inspiration in their struggles to achieve equal rights for their people. Albert Einstein said thus about Mahatma Gandhi: a leader of his people unsupported by any outward authority, a politician whose success rests not upon craft nor the mastery of technical devices, but simply on the convincing power of his personality, a victorious fighter who has always scorned the use of force, a man of wisdom and humility, armed with resolve and inflexible consistency, who has devoted all his strength to the uplifting of his people and the betterment of their lot. A man who has confronted the brutality of Europe with the dignity of the simple human being, and thus at all times risen superior. Generations to come, it may be, will scarce believe that such a one as this ever in flesh and blood walked upon this earth. In 2009, when Barack Obama was visiting Wakefield High School in US, a ninth grader asks the would-be president, if you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be? Obama chuckled and answered, well, dead or alive? That's a pretty big list. I think it might be Gandhi, who is a real hero of mine. Nelson Mandela, great leader of the South African people and another giant of the 20th century anti-colonial struggle, often cited Mahatma Gandhi as one of his greatest teachers. Gandhi's ideas have played a vital role in South Africa's transformation, and with the help of Gandhi's teaching, apartheid has been overcome. Christ gave us the goals and Mahatma Gandhi the tactics. said Martin Luther King Jr., the beloved civil rights leader in the United States of America who adopted nonviolence as a weapon of choice to help millions of African Americans fight for their rights. Noted American writer and novelist Paulus Buck had this to say after the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi. He was right. He knew he was right. We all knew he was right. The man who killed him knew he was right. However long the follies of the violent continue, they but prove that Gandhi was right. Resist to the very end, he said, but without violence. Of violence the world is sick. O India, dare to be worthy of your Gandhi. And finally, no one, of course, could say it better than Nobel Prize winning Irish playwright and passionate socialist George Bernard Shaw. Impressions of Gandhi? You might well ask for someone's impression of the Himalayas. And Then Gandhi Came is an extract from the Discovery of India in which Jawaharlal Nehru talks about the timely arrival of Gandhi in the Indian political scenario at a time when India as a nation had lost all its hope of salvation, crushed down by the oppressive rule by the British. He makes an assessment of the psychological changes that Gandhi brought about in India. He seemed to emerge from the millions of Indians speaking their language political struggle, which till then entirely belonged to the elite class, took a new dimension and the masses joined the struggle. But Gandhi's fight was not merely for political freedom. He fought against everything that degraded and humiliated Indians. His words had the power of conviction and his deeds were strongly founded in truth. Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, was a central figure in Indian politics both before and after independence. He emerged as an eminent leader of the Indian independence movement, serving India as Prime Minister from its establishment in 1947 as an independent nation until his death in 1964. He was also known as Pandit Nehru due to his roots with the Kashmiri Pandit community, while Indian children knew him better as Chacha Nehru. He is considered as the architect of modern India as a sovereign, socialist, democratic republic. Nehru was a prolific writer in English and wrote a number of books such as The Discovery of India, Glimpses of World History, and his autobiography, Towards Freedom. He had written 30 letters to his daughter Indira Gandhi when she was 10 years old and in a boarding school in Missouri, teaching about natural history and the story of civilizations. The collection of these letters was later published as a book, Letters from a Father to His Daughter. In 1955, Nehru was awarded the Bharat Ratna, India's highest civilian honor. President Rajendra Prasad awarded him the honor without taking advice from the Prime Minister, as it would be the normal constitutional procedure. The Discovery of India was written by Jawaharlal Nehru during his imprisonment in 1942 to 1945 at Ahmednagar Fort in present-day Maharashtra. The book was written in 1944 but published in 1946. The journey in the Discovery of India begins from ancient history leading up to the last years of British Raj. Nehru uses his knowledge of the Upanishads, Vedas and textbooks on ancient history to introduce to the reader the development of India from the Indus Valley civilization through the changes in socio-political scenario every foreign invader brought to the present-day conditions. Nehru was jailed for his participation in the Quit India movement along with other Indian leaders, and he used this time to write down his thoughts and knowledge about India's history. The book provides a broad view of Indian history, philosophy and culture as viewed from the eyes of an Indian fighting for the independence of his country. The book is considered as a classic work ever since its publication in 1946. The First World War created a new economic and political situation. It led to a huge increase in defense expenditure, which was financed by war loans and increasing taxes. Customs duties were raised and income tax introduced. Through the warriors, prices increased, doubling between 1913 and 1918, leading to an extreme hardship for the common people. Villages were called upon to supply soldiers, and the forced recruitment in rural areas caused widespread anger. After the end of the First World War, the Indians were disappointed by the treatment they received from Britain. A large section of the people lived in poverty as a result of British policies. People did not have access to land or work. When the First World War came to an end, people expected peace, relief, and progress, but it brought repressive rule and martial law. People felt that they were being humiliated. Large numbers of people became unemployed. People had lost all their hopes of salvation. They did not know how to free India from poverty and misery. There was no great leader who could pull them out of the dungeon of misery into which they were thrown. India had indeed become a derelict nation, a nation that is neglected. While all hopes were diminishing, emerged a man whom the country began to revere, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. He became the undisputed leader of the freedom struggle. He advocated the policy of satyagraha and civil disobedience. He inspired millions to follow in his path. His vision took the freedom struggle to the national level. He landed in India on January 9, 1915, which is now honored as the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas. Like a magnet, Gandhiji influenced Indians. It was at Champaran where Mohandas became Mahatma. One of his major achievements in 1918 were the Champaran and Kheda agitations, a movement against British landlords. The farmers and peasantry were forced to grow and cultivate indigo and were even forced to sell them at fixed prices. Finally, these farmers pledged to Mahatma Gandhi and non-violent protests took place, wherein Gandhiji won the battle. Kheda in the year 1918 was hit by floods and farmers wanted relief from tax. Using non-cooperation as his main weapon, Gandhiji used it in pledging the farmers for the non-payment of taxes. Gandhi got much public support, and finally in May 1918, government gave the provisions related to the tax payment. The Rowlatt Act and the following Jallianwala Massacre in 1919 triggered off nationwide hatred towards British rule. Rowlatt Act allowed the British to jail protesters without a trial for up to 2 years. Many protests sprang up in Punjab. Gandhiji organized a non-violent satyagraha against the Rowlatt Act. A hartal was organized on 6th April 1919. Rallies were conducted. Shops were closed down. Workers conducted strike. Transport and communication systems came to a standstill. These protests led to the Jallianwala Massacre. The Jallianwala Massacre, also known as the Amritsar Massacre, took place on 13th April 1919 when acting Brigadier General Reginald Dyer ordered troops of the British Indian Army to fire their rifles into a crowd of unarmed Indian civilians in Jallianwala Bagh, Amritsar, Punjab, killing at least 400 people, including men and women. Over 1,000 people were injured. It is also referred as Bloodbath on the day of Baisakhi. Now let's have a look at some of the defining moments in Gandhiji's journey towards freeing India. Civil disobedience movement, Champaran Satyagraha, Khilafat movement and the non-cooperation movement, Dandi March, Quit India movement, etc. it is through Gandhiji's leadership that India was able to attain freedom on 15th August 1947. Jawaharlal Nehru became the first Prime Minister of independent India, and the nation hailed Mahatma Gandhi as the father of the nation. Jawaharlal Nehru writes about the timely arrival of Gandhiji to Indian politics when the country was in dire need of such a leadership. Gandhiji was like a beam of light that removed the darkness. Jawaharlal Nehru makes a right assessment of Gandhiji in his discovery of India. World War I ended at last, and the peace, instead of bringing us relief and progress, brought us repressive legislation and martial law in the Punjab. A bitter sense of humiliation and a passionate anger filled our people. We had become a derelict nation. Yet, what could we do? How to change this vicious process? We seemed to be helpless in the grip of some all-powerful monster. Our limbs were paralyzed, our minds deadened. Large numbers of people cut off from the land and incapable of any kind of manual or technical work joined the swelling army of the unemployed, and helpless, hopeless, sank ever deeper into the morass. They did not know where to look, for neither the old nor the new offered them any hope. What could we do? How could we pull India out of this quagmire of poverty and defeatism? Not for a few years of excitement and agony and suspense, but for long generations, our people had offered their blood and toil, tears and sweat. And this process had eaten its way deep into the body and soul of India, poisoning every aspect of our life. And then Gandhi came. He was like a powerful current of fresh air that made us stretch ourselves and take deep breaths, like a beam of light that pierced the darkness and removed the scales from our eyes, like a whirlwind that upset many things, but most of all the workings of people's minds. He did not descend from the top. He seemed to emerge from millions of India speaking their language. Get off the backs of these peasants and workers, he told us, all of you who live by their exploitation. Get rid of the system that produces this poverty and misery. Political freedom took a new shape then and acquired a new content. Much that he said we only partially accepted or sometimes did not accept at all. But all this was secondary. The essence of his teaching was fearlessness and truth, and action allied to these, always keeping the welfare of the masses in view. The greatest gift for an individual or a nation, so we had been told in our ancient books, was abhaya or fearlessness, not merely bodily courage, but the absence of fear from the mind. The dominant impulse in India under the British rule was that of fear, pervasive, oppressing, strangling fear. Fear of the army, the police, the widespread secret service, fear of the official class, fear of laws meant to suppress and of prison, fear of the landlord's agent, fear of the moneylender, fear of the unemployment and starvation, which were always on the threshold. It was against this all-pervading fear that Gandhiji's quiet and determined voice was raised. Be not afraid. Was it so simple as all that? Not quite. And yet, fear builds its phantoms, which are more fearsome than reality itself. And reality, when calmly analyzed and its consequences willingly accepted, loses much of its terror. So, suddenly, as it were, that black pall of fear was lifted from the people's shoulders, not wholly, of course, but to an amazing degree. As fear is a close companion to falsehood, so truth follows fearlessness. The Indian people did not become much more truthful than they were, nor did they change their essential nature overnight. Nevertheless, a sea change was visible as a need for falsehood and furtive behavior lessened. It was a psychological change, almost as if some expert in psychoanalytical methods had probed deep into the patient's past, found out the origins of his complexes, exposed them to his view, and thus rid him of that burden. There was a psychological reaction also, a feeling of shame at a long submission to an alien rule that had degraded and humiliated us, and a desire to submit no longer, whatever the consequences might be. We did not grow much more truthful, perhaps, than we had been previously, but Gandhi was always there as a symbol of uncompromising truth to pull us up and shame us into truth. What is truth? I do not know for certain, and perhaps our truths are relative, and absolute truth is beyond us. Different persons may and do take different views of truth, and each individual is powerfully influenced by his own background, training, and impulses. So also Gandhi. But truth is, at least for an individual, what he himself feels and knows to be true. According to this definition, I do not know of any person who holds the truth as Gandhi does. That is a dangerous quality in a politician, for he speaks out his mind and even lets the public see its changing phases. Gandhi influenced millions of people in India in varying degrees. Some changed the whole texture of their lives, others were only partly affected, or the effect wore off, and yet not quite, for some part of it could not be wholly shaken off. Different people reacted differently, and each will give his own answer to this question. His call of action was twofold. There was, of course, the action involved in challenging and resisting foreign rule. There was also the action which led us to fight against our own social evils. Apart from the fundamental objective of the Congress, the freedom of India, and the method of peaceful action, the principal planks of the Congress were national unity, which involved the solution of the minority problems and the raising of the depressed classes and the ending of the curse of untouchability. Realizing that the main props of British rule were fear, prestige, the cooperation of the people, and certain classes whose vested interest was centered in British rule, Gandhi attacked these foundations. Titles were to be given up, and though the title holders responded to this only in small measure, the popular respect for these British given titles disappeared. New standards and values were set up, and the pomp and splendor of the viceregal court and the princes suddenly appeared supremely ridiculous. Rich men were not so anxious to flaunt their riches, outwardly at least. Many of them adopted simpler ways, and in their dress became almost indistinguishable from humbler folk. He sent us to the villages, and the countryside hummed with the activity of the innumerable messengers of the new gospel of action. The peasant was shaken up, and he began to emerge from his shell. The effect on us was different, but equally far-reaching, for we saw, for the first time as it were, the villager in the intimacy of his mud hut, and with the stark shadow of hunger always pursuing him. We learnt our Indian economics more from these visits than from books and learned discourses. The emotional experience we had already undergone was emphasized and confirmed, and henceforward there could be no going back for us to our old life or our old standards. What was the idea of India which he was setting out to mold according to his own wishes and ideals? I shall work for an India in which the poorest shall feel that it is their country, in whose making they have an effective voice. An India in which there shall be no high class and low class of people. An India in which all communities shall live in perfect harmony. There can be no room in such an India for the curse of untouchability or the curse of intoxicating drinks and drugs. Women will enjoy the same right as men. This is the India of my dreams. Proud of his Hindu inheritance as he was, he tried to give to Hinduism a kind of universal attire and included all religions within the fold of truth. He refused to narrow his cultural inheritance. Indian culture, he wrote, is neither Hindu, Islamic, or any other wholly. It is a fusion of all. Again he said, I want the culture of all lands to be blown about my house as freely as possible. But I refuse to be blown off my feet by any. I refuse to live in other people's houses as an interloper, a beggar, or a slave. Influenced by modern thought currents, he never let go of his roots and clung to them tenaciously. It's not surprising that this astonishingly vital man, full of self-confidence and an unusual kind of power, standing for equality and freedom for each individual, fascinated the masses of India and attracted them like a magnet. He seemed to them to link up the past with the future and to make the dismal present appear just as a stepping stone to that future of life and hope. Thus, he effected a vast psychological revolution, not only among those who followed his lead, but also among his opponents and those many neutrals who could not make up their minds what to think and what to do. Thank you.